The scream came from the stables before the sun had even touched the hills. Kaelen was already moving before his own mind caught up with his body, boots hitting frozen ground, breath cutting sharp in his throat. A guard had shouted something about an intruder, about blood on the hay, and every instinct in him had gone still and cold the way it only did right before something changed forever. He shoved the stable door open with his shoulder. The smell hit him first. Not blood, something older, something wild. A woman lay curled in the far stall, wrapped in a horse blanket that did not belong to her, her dark hair matted with straw, her breathing shallow and uneven. And pressed against her side, so close their bodies rose and fell together, was a wolf. Not a house wolf, not a trained one, a wild, gray-muzzled, heavily pregnant wolf, her belly low and swollen, her eyes open and locked on him the second he stepped through the door. She did not growl at the woman. She growled at him. Kaelen had faced armed men without flinching. He had stood at the edge of battlefields and given orders that decided who lived and who did not. But nothing in his life had prepared him for the sound that wolf made, low and steady, aimed only at him, as if she had been waiting 15 years for exactly this moment to protect the person beside her. "Easy," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the wolf or to himself. The woman stirred, her eyes opened, unfocused, then sharpened the moment she saw him standing there. She didn't scream. She didn't ask where she was. She looked at the wolf first, checking her, running a hand gently over the animal's side like it was the only thing in the world that mattered, and only then did she look back up at Kaelen. "Please don't hurt her," she said. Her voice was rough, cracked from cold, but steady. "She hasn't done anything wrong." "She's pregnant," Kaelen said. "In a stall. In my stables. In the middle of winter." "I know." "Who are you?" A pause. Long enough that he noticed it. "Wren," she said finally. "Just Wren." Behind him, his beta, Doran, had arrived with 2 guards, all 3 of them slowing the moment they saw the scene. Doran's hand went instinctively to the hilt at his side, and the wolf's growl deepened, rising in pitch, her body angling itself in front of Wren like a wall made of muscle and fur. "Kaelen," Doran said quietly, "that's not a normal wolf." Kaelen already knew that. He had grown up around wolves his whole life, had shifted into one himself since he was 14, had learned to read every twitch of ear and tail the way other men read faces. This wolf's behavior was wrong in a way he couldn't yet name. She wasn't defending territory. She wasn't defending a den. She was defending a person, specifically, the way a mate defends a mate, or a mother defends a child. But she was staring at Wren with the second kind of look, the kind that made Kaelen's chest tighten without permission. "Get the healer," he said, "and bring blankets, real ones." "You're not sending them away?" Doran asked. "Would you send a pregnant woman and a pregnant wolf out into the snow?" Doran didn't answer, because they both already knew what the pack elders would say if they heard about this. Strangers were dangerous. Strange wolves were worse. But Kaelen had learned young that the loudest warning in a room was rarely the wisest one, and something about the way this wolf refused to look away from him, steady and unafraid despite her exhaustion, told him this was not a simple matter of trespassing. "Wren," he said again, crouching slowly, keeping his movements small so the wolf wouldn't startle. "How long have you been out here?" "I don't know," she admitted. 2 days, maybe 3. I lost track after the second night." "And her?" He nodded at the wolf. "She's been with me longer than that." "How long?" Wren's hand tightened slightly in the wolf's fur. Her eyes dropped, just for a second, to the animal's swollen belly, and something passed over her face that looked less like fear and more like grief. "My whole life," she said quietly. Kaelen felt the words settle somewhere behind his ribs, though he could not have explained why. A whole life was not a stray encounter. A whole life was not a wolf that had simply followed a lost traveler through the snow. A whole life meant history. It meant a bond older than the woman shivering in front of him seemed to understand herself. The healer arrived, out of breath, carrying 2 heavy blankets and a bag of supplies. She stopped in the doorway the moment she saw the wolf, her professional calm slipping for just a heartbeat. "That animal shouldn't be this pregnant and this thin," she said. "She's carrying too much weight for how little she's eating." "Can you help her?" Wren asked immediately, before anyone could ask her another question about herself. "Please, help her first." "You're the one who's freezing," the healer said. "She's the one who's been keeping me alive," Wren answered. The stable went quiet at that. Even the wolf's growl faded into something softer, almost like she recognized the words, almost like she agreed with them. Kaelen studied Wren more closely then, past the dirt and the cold and the exhaustion carved into her face. There was something in the shape of her jaw, in the set of her shoulders, that tugged at a memory he couldn't place. He told himself it was nothing. Travelers passed through these lands all the time, and exhaustion made every face look a little like someone you used to know. The healer knelt beside the wolf first, following Wren's plea, and ran careful hands along the animal's swollen sides. The wolf tensed but did not snap, did not even bare her teeth, though every muscle in her body stayed rigid and ready. "She's close," the healer murmured. "Days, maybe less. And you're right. She's underfed for how far along she is. Whoever has been caring for her has been giving up their own share of food to keep her going." Wren said nothing, but her silence answered the question well enough. "How were you feeding her out there?" Kaelen asked. "However I could," Wren said. "It wasn't always enough. You could have left her behind, traveled faster, found shelter sooner." Wren's eyes lifted to his, and for the first time since he'd stepped into the stall, there was something sharp behind the exhaustion, something that refused to be pitied. "I would never leave her behind," she said. "Not for anything." It was said with a force that surprised him, a certainty too old and too deep for a woman who claimed she barely knew where she was. Kaelen filed the reaction away without comment, the way he filed away every strange detail a soldier's instinct told him mattered. The wolf, as if sensing the conversation was about her, let out a low huff and pressed her head briefly against Wren's knee before settling again, watchful, patient, exhausted in her own right. "We need to move quickly," the healer said, standing. "The cold isn't good for either of them." Doran stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Kaelen could hear. "You understand what the elders will say when they hear a wild wolf is sleeping in the family wing. Let them say it to my face then." "Kaelen, this isn't like you. You don't make decisions this fast, not about strangers." "I make decisions fast about things that matter," Kaelen said. "I just don't always know why they matter yet." Doran studied him for a long moment, the kind of look only a friend of many years could get away with giving a king, and then exhaled and stepped back. "Fine. But if that wolf so much as scratches a servant, it's your explanation to give, not mine. Understood?" As the guards helped Wren rise from the straw, her legs unsteady beneath her, the wolf rose with her, refusing to be more than a single stride away at any moment. It was not the movement of an animal that had simply attached itself to a convenient traveling companion. It was the movement of something bonded, something that had made a promise long before either of them had ever set foot near these stables. Wren staggered slightly on the icy ground outside, and without thinking, Kaelen reached out to steady her elbow. She flinched at the contact, just slightly, just enough for him to notice, and then forced herself still, as if flinching were a habit she had trained herself out of and hated failing at now. "Sorry," she muttered. "You don't have to apologize for that." "I know," she said, in a tone that suggested she didn't quite believe it. They walked together across the frozen courtyard, the wolf pacing beside them, her breath rising in soft white clouds, her dark eyes flicking constantly between Wren and Kaelen, as though she were keeping careful watch over both of them now, instead of just one. Servants paused at windows to stare. A stable boy nearly dropped a bucket of feed. Word would spread through the castle by mid-morning, Kaelen knew, twisted and exaggerated a dozen different ways before it reached the ears of the pack elders. He decided he did not care. Whatever this woman and this wolf were carrying with them, secret or accident or fate, he intended to understand it before anyone else got the chance to turn it into gossip. But the wolf kept watching him, not with fear, with recognition, as if she knew exactly who he was. As if she had been waiting for him. "Bring them both inside," Kaelen said finally, standing, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The woman gets a room in the east wing. The wolf stays wherever she wants to stay." Doran's eyebrows lifted. "The east wing is for the family." "I'm aware, Kaelen. I said the east wing." He didn't know why he'd said it. He only knew that something about the way Wren had guarded that wolf, and the way that wolf had guarded her right back, told him this was not something he could hand off to the servants and forget by supper. As the guards helped Wren to her feet, careful not to crowd the wolf pressing against her side, the animal let out one final sound, low and rough, almost a whine, aimed directly at Kaelen. Not a warning this time, something closer to a question. He didn't have an answer for it yet. But standing there in the cold morning light, watching a stranger and a wild, pregnant wolf being led toward his own family's private wing, Kaelen understood one thing with complete certainty. Whatever had brought them to his stables in the middle of winter was not an accident. And whatever secret that wolf was carrying alongside her unborn pups, it was about to tear his entire world apart. By the time the sun reached its highest point, the whole castle knew a stranger and a wild wolf were living in the east wing. Wren sat on the edge of a bed too soft for her liking, in a room too large for one person, watching the pregnant wolf pace slow circles across the floor. The animal would not settle. She sniffed the corners, pressed her nose to the base of the door, circled back, and repeated the entire routine, as if searching for something the room refused to give her. "I know," Wren whispered. "I don't like it here either." The wolf paused at the sound of her voice, ears flicking toward her, then returned to pacing. A soft knock interrupted the quiet. Kaelen entered without waiting for an answer, carrying a tray of food himself, instead of sending a servant, which struck Wren as strange for a man everyone in the halls had been whispering about with such careful, nervous respect. "You don't usually deliver your own meals," she said. "I don't usually find strangers sleeping in my stables either," he answered. Seemed fair to break a few habits at once. He set the tray down and pulled a chair close enough that the wolf immediately repositioned herself between them, a low warning rumbling in her chest. "She still doesn't trust me," Kaelen said. "She doesn't trust anyone quickly. But she trusted you." Wren's hand found the wolf's fur without conscious thought, the motion so practiced it looked like breathing. "She had a reason to." "Which is?" Wren hesitated, and Kaelen watched the hesitation carefully, the way a man watches weather before deciding whether to trust the sky. "It's complicated," she said finally. "I have time. I don't think I have the right words yet." He didn't push, though every instinct told him to. Instead, he nodded toward the food. "Eat first. Words can come later." She ate slowly, watching him as much as he watched her, and for a while the room held nothing but the sound of the wolf's restless pacing and the quiet clink of a spoon against a bowl. "Your accent," Kaelen said eventually. "It isn't from the border villages." "I've moved around a lot." "From where, originally?" "I don't remember," she said, and for the first time, the words sounded less like evasion and more like an admission that cost her something. "I've been told stories, different ones, depending on who was telling them. None of them ever felt true." "That's an unusual thing to say about your own past." "It's an unusual past." The wolf chose that moment to let out a soft, pained sound, low in her throat, and both of them turned toward her instantly. She had stopped pacing, and now stood rigid near the window, body tense, breath coming faster. "Is she in pain?" Kaelen asked, already rising. "She does this sometimes," Wren said, though her voice had tightened with worry. "When she's overwhelmed, when there's too much happening at once." "Overwhelmed by what?" Wren didn't answer. She crossed to the wolf instead, kneeling beside her, murmuring words too quiet for Kaelen to catch, words in a rhythm that sounded almost like a lullaby, but not quite in any language he recognized. The wolf's breathing slowed, her body loosened by degrees. And after a long moment, she lowered herself back to the floor, resting her head against Wren's knee, eyes half closed but still watchful. "What language was that?" Kaelen asked quietly. Wren blinked, as if she hadn't realized she'd been speaking anything unusual at all. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's just always been there. Something I say when she's frightened. It calms her. That's not something people usually know without knowing where it came from." "I'm aware of that," Wren said, an edge creeping into her voice now, tired and defensive at once. "Believe me, I've spent a long time wondering the same thing." Kaelen let the silence stretch, unwilling to press further, while she looked so close to breaking, but his mind was already turning the pieces over the way it turned over battle plans, searching for the shape hidden beneath the fragments. That night, unable to sleep, he found himself walking the halls of the castle instead of resting, drawn without quite deciding to be toward the old portrait gallery in the west corridor. Dust lined the frames of ancestors long dead, faces stern and painted with the same sharp jaw that ran through every generation of his family. He stopped in front of one particular painting, one he had passed 1,000 times without truly looking at it. A woman, young, dark-haired, standing beside a nursemaid holding an infant wrapped in pale blue cloth. The plaque beneath it read simply, "The Queen and her daughter, a year before the fire." He had heard the story his whole life, the way every pack member had. 15 years ago, the royal den had burned in the night. The old queen had died in the flames. Her infant daughter, barely a year old, was assumed lost with her, though no remains had ever truly been confirmed, only ash and silence, and a grief too large for anyone to question too closely. Kaelen stared at the painted infant's face for a long time, unsettled by something he couldn't name, then shook his head at his own imagination and returned to his room, telling himself exhaustion was inventing connections that didn't exist. The next morning, a pack tracker named Alden requested an urgent audience, his expression tight with the particular caution men used when they weren't sure their news would be welcomed. "I ran a scent trace on the wolf, as you asked," Alden said. "Standard procedure for any unclaimed animal brought into the territory. And there's something layered in her scent. Old, faint, but consistent, the kind of marking that only comes from years spent inside a royal den." Kaelen's stomach turned cold. "That's not possible. The den scent lines all died with the fire." "I know what the records say," Alden said carefully. "I'm only telling you what the trace found. Run it again." "I already have. Twice." Kaelen sat back, the weight of the words settling slow and heavy across his chest. A royal den scent did not simply appear on a stray wolf found sleeping in a stable beside a woman who claimed to remember nothing of her own past. Royal den scent was laid deliberately by nursemaids and caretakers on pups raised inside the family's most protected walls. It did not wash away easily. It did not appear by accident. "Say nothing of this yet," Kaelen said. "Not to the elders, not to the guards, not to anyone." "You think it's connected to her," Alden said. "It wasn't a question." "I don't know what I think," Kaelen admitted, "but I intend to find out before anyone else decides the answer for me." That evening, he returned to the East Wing, and this time he found Wren not resting but standing at the window, watching the wolf sleep fitfully on a blanket by the fire, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though holding in something that threatened to spill. "You look like someone carrying a weight she doesn't want to put down," he said. "Maybe I am. Would it help to share it?" She turned to him then, and for the first time, her guard slipped enough for him to see real fear underneath the exhaustion, real fear layered with something closer to grief. "There are things I remember," she said quietly, "that don't make sense with the life I was told I lived. Flashes, a hallway I shouldn't recognize, a woman's voice singing something I still know the words to, though I've never been taught it, a fire I dream about that isn't in any story anyone ever told me." Kaelen's chest tightened. "When did these start?" "They've always been there," Wren said. I used to think everyone had memories like that, pieces that don't fit. It wasn't until I got older that I realized mine never resolved into anything whole. They just stayed broken. And the wolf? Wren looked toward the sleeping animal, and her voice dropped lower, almost too quiet to hear. She's the only piece of my life that has never once felt like a lie. Tell me about the dreams, Kaelen said, sitting slowly across from her, giving her space rather than pressing closer. Not the flashes, the full dreams, if you have them. Wren wrapped her arms tighter around herself, as if bracing against a cold that had nothing to do with the room. There's one that comes more than the others, she said. I'm small, younger than I can properly picture myself being. There's smoke, thick and black, filling a hallway I can't see the end of. Someone is carrying me, running. I can feel her heartbeat against my cheek, faster than anything should beat, and she keeps saying the same thing over and over. What does she say? Stay quiet, stay quiet, stay quiet. Wren's voice cracked slightly on the third repetition, as if the memory cost her something each time she spoke it aloud. I always wake up before I see her face. And the wolf, is she in that dream? No, Wren said, but I know, somehow, that she's close. The way you know someone is standing behind you before you turn around. Kaelen studied her, weighing his next words carefully, aware that whatever he said next might either open a door or slam one shut permanently. There was a fire here, he said, 15 years ago, in the royal den. It killed the queen. Her infant daughter was never confirmed among the remains, though everyone assumed the worst. Wren went very still. I'm not saying that has anything to do with you, Kaelen continued quickly, watching her face for any sign of what the words had triggered. I only mention it because it's the kind of story that involves smoke, and a hallway, and someone carrying a child who was told to stay quiet. You think I'm her, Wren said, her voice barely above a whisper, the lost daughter. I don't know what I think yet. I only know the pieces you've described fit a shape I recognize. Wren pressed a hand against her mouth, and for a long moment she said nothing at all, her eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance that had nothing to do with the room around her. If that's true, she said finally, then everything I was ever told about myself is a lie, built on top of a lie. Or it's the truth finally finding its way back to you, Kaelen said. Sometimes those look the same from the inside. The wolf stirred by the fire, lifting her head just enough to fix her dark eyes on both of them, as though she understood every word passing between them and had simply been waiting, patiently, for someone else to finally say it out loud. She's known this whole time, hasn't she? Wren said, looking at the wolf now with something between wonder and heartbreak. Whatever the truth is, she's carried it the entire time and never once been able to tell me. Wolves don't lie the way people do, Kaelen said gently. If she's been guarding you like this, protecting you like this, it's because she made a promise a long time ago that she has kept every single day since, even when it cost her everything to keep it. Wren moved to sit beside the wolf, running her fingers slowly through the coarse fur along her neck, and the animal leaned into the touch with a low, exhausted sound that seemed to carry 15 years of held breath finally beginning to release. I need to know, Wren said. Whatever it costs, whatever it changes, I can't keep living with pieces that don't fit. Then we find out together, Kaelen said, starting tomorrow. Why would you help me with this? You don't know me. I could be nothing. I could be no one important to your pack at all. You could be, Kaelen agreed, but that wolf didn't guard a stranger the way she guarded you, and I don't believe in coincidences large enough to hold a royal den scent, a 15-year-old fire, and a woman who dreams in a voice she was never taught. Wren looked at him for a long moment, something shifting behind her tired eyes, cautious and fragile, but no longer entirely alone. Thank you, she said quietly, for not treating this like nonsense. Thank the wolf, Kaelen said, allowing himself the smallest smile. She's the one who refused to let any of us look away. Later, long after Wren had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep beside the fire, curled close to the wolf's warmth, Kaelen stood once more in the portrait gallery, staring at the painted face of the infant in pale blue cloth. He studied the shape of her small jaw, the set of her tiny brow, searching for a resemblance he was no longer sure he was imagining. Somewhere in the castle's oldest records, he knew, there would be a name for that lost daughter, sealed away with the rest of the grief no one had wanted to disturb. Tomorrow he intended to find it, whatever it cost him, whatever truth it dragged back into the light after 15 years of careful, deliberate silence. The record room smelled of old paper and older secrets, and Kaelen had not set foot inside it in years, not since a childhood tutor had once dragged him through the family archives to memorize the names of ancestors long turned to dust. He found the fire records near the bottom of a locked chest, sealed with wax that had cracked from age rather than tampering. The account was brief, clinical, written by a scribe who had clearly been more concerned with formality than truth. The royal den had caught fire in the deepest hour of the night. The old queen, sleeping nearest the nursery, had died attempting to reach her infant daughter. The child's remains were never conclusively identified among the ash, though the surviving staff had assumed the worst, given no one had come forward in the years since to claim otherwise. One line, near the bottom, caught his attention and refused to let go. The infant's nursemaid, a woman named Elna, was also never accounted for among the dead or the survivors. Her disappearance was recorded as unresolved. Kaelen read the line 3 times. A nursemaid, gone without explanation, on the same night an infant vanished without a body ever being found. 15 years of silence built on top of an assumption no one had ever bothered to question, because grief did not want to be questioned, and a pack in mourning rarely looked for reasons to reopen a wound it had only just learned to live beside. He brought the record straight to Alden, who read it twice, before looking up with an expression Kaelen recognized from years of shared battlefields, the particular stillness of a man realizing the ground beneath him had shifted. "If the nursemaid survived," Alden said slowly, "and if she took the child with her, then she's been running for 15 years, Kaelen finished, hiding an heir the pack believed was dead. "That would explain the scent," Alden said. "If Elna raised the child in isolation, away from any den, away from any pack marking beyond the original layer she'd already laid before the fire, the scent would fade over time but never disappear completely. It would sit exactly the way we found it on the wolf." Kaelen went very still. "Say that again," he said. "The scent would sit on the wolf exactly the way we found it," Alden repeated, confused by the sudden intensity in Kaelen's voice. "Not on Wren," Kaelen said. "You said it yourself when you first brought me the report. The royal den scent was on the wolf, not on the woman." Alden's confusion deepened into something closer to dawning horror. "You think the wolf isn't just a bonded protector?" "I think the wolf is Elna," Kaelen said. "I think a nursemaid who vanished the night of the fire has been unable to shift back into her human form for 15 years, and has spent every single one of those years as the only thing standing between an heir this pack believes is dead and a world that would either exploit her or destroy her the moment it learned the truth." The room went quiet except for the distant sound of wind against old stone. "That's not possible," Alden said, though his voice lacked conviction. "A wolf stuck in that shape for 15 years? The strain alone would have killed most shifters within the first year." "Unless something was keeping her tethered," Kaelen said. "A promise, a purpose, something strong enough to hold a body together long past the point it should have broken." He thought of the wolf's exhausted, careful eyes, the way she had watched him from the moment he'd stepped into the stall, not with the confusion of an animal, but with the weight of a decision made and kept for a decade and a half. He thought of the way she pressed her head against Wren's knee, not like a companion, but like someone who had spent every day since that fire, silently apologizing for a truth she could never speak. He needed to know for certain, and there was only one way to find out. That evening, Kaelen returned to the east wing carrying a small vial the healer had prepared, a compound used rarely and only in cases where a shifter's body had become dangerously unstable, unable to move safely between forms without assistance. It was not without risk. Forcing a shift after such prolonged suppression could tear at a body already worn thin by exhaustion and pregnancy. But leaving her locked in that shape indefinitely carried its own danger, one that grew heavier with every day her pups continued to develop inside a form that had never been meant to carry them for this long. Wren met him at the door, and something in his expression must have told her everything before he said a single word. "You found something," she said. "I found a name," Kaelen answered. Elna, a nursemaid who disappeared the same night the fire took the queen, and the infant everyone assumed died with her. Wren's hand drifted, almost without her noticing, toward the sleeping wolf beside the fire. "You think that's her," she said quietly. "Not just a protector. Her. I think there's only one way to know for certain." He explained the compound carefully, honestly, the risks laid out plainly, rather than softened for comfort. Wren listened without interrupting, her jaw tightening with each new detail, and when he finished, she knelt beside the wolf and pressed her forehead gently against the animal's. "If this is true," Wren whispered, "you have spent 15 years giving up everything so I could have a life you thought I deserved. I won't let you carry that alone for one more day." The wolf's eyes opened slowly, dark and impossibly tired, and something in them seemed almost to understand, almost to consent, though whether from comprehension or simple trust in the voice speaking to her, Kaelen couldn't say. They waited until the deepest, quietest part of the night, when the halls had emptied and the fire had burned low, before the healer administered the compound. The wolf's body tensed immediately, a violent shudder rolling through her from nose to tail, and Wren gripped her fur tightly, murmuring the same wordless, half-remembered lullaby she had used before, over and over, steady even as her own voice shook. The shift, when it came, was nothing like the clean transformations Kaelen had witnessed among healthy pack members his whole life. It was slow, agonizing, the wolf's shape stretching and folding in ways that clearly caused pain, her cries rising into something almost human before the change had even finished. Wren held on through all of it, refusing to look away, refusing to let go, even as tears streaked silently down her face. When it was finally over, an exhausted, painfully thin woman lay curled on the floor where the wolf had been, her hair silver at the roots, though her face could not have been older than 50, her breathing shallow but steady, her eyes fluttering open to focus, for the first time in 15 years, on the grown woman kneeling beside her. "Wren," the woman whispered, her voice cracked from disuse, but unmistakably certain. "My God, look how much you've grown." Wren's breath caught in her throat. "You know my name." "I gave you that name," Elna said, tears slipping freely down cheeks, lined with more years of hardship than her actual age should have allowed. "The night I ran, I couldn't call you by the name they gave you in the den. It was too dangerous, too easily traced. So I called you Wren, after the smallest, quietest bird I could think of, because that's exactly what we needed you to be. Small, quiet, impossible to notice." "Then it's true," Wren said, her voice breaking. "Everything he found in the records, the fire, the queen. You are the daughter they thought had died," Elna said. "You are the heir this entire pack has grieved for 15 years, without ever knowing they were grieving a mistake. And I am the fool who couldn't shift back long enough to tell anyone, trapped in that shape by my own body's refusal to let go of the promise I made the night I pulled you out of that fire." Kaelen, standing quietly near the door, felt the full weight of the moment settle over him, heavier than any battle he had ever led, heavier than any decision he had ever made as king. The woman in front of him was not simply a lost traveler stumbling into his stables by accident. She was blood. She was family the pack had buried without a body, mourned without truth, and replaced in every line of succession with names that had never belonged there in the first place. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" he asked gently. "Even trapped in that form, there must have been moments you could have found help." Elna's expression darkened, old fear surfacing beneath the exhaustion. "Because the fire wasn't an accident," she said, "and I didn't know who to trust with that truth. not with an infant's life depending on my silence." The room went utterly still. "What do you mean, not an accident?" Kaelen asked, though some part of him had already begun to suspect the answer, had perhaps suspected it since the moment a nursemaid's scent had turned up on a wolf that should never have existed in the first place. Elna looked at him with the steady, unwavering certainty of a woman who had carried this exact truth, unspoken, for 15 long years. "Someone set that fire deliberately," she said. "Someone inside your own court. And they are very likely still here, still trusted, still standing close enough to this family to finish what they started the moment they learn the child they thought they killed is still breathing. You need to rest," the healer said gently, moving to check Elna's pulse and the shallow rise of her breathing. "That shift took more out of you than your body has left to give freely." "There isn't time to rest," Elna said, though even as she spoke, her eyelids fought against the pull of exhaustion. "You need to hear this while I can still say it clearly." "Take your time," Kaelen said, kneeling now beside both women, "but tell me everything you remember." Elna closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength, and when she opened them again, her voice had steadied into something almost businesslike, the tone of a woman who had rehearsed this exact confession 1,000 times in her head across 15 years of silence, waiting for a moment she had nearly stopped believing would ever come. "3 nights before the fire," she said, "I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. 2 men, speaking low in the corridor outside the nursery, discussing succession, discussing how close the old queen's bloodline stood to certain claims that mattered to certain families in this pack. I didn't think much of it at the time. Court politics were always full of that kind of talk, ambitious men measuring their place against a throne they'd never sit on." "Did you recognize their voices?" Kaelen asked. "One of them, yes," Elna said. "The other was quieter, more careful, someone who clearly understood the danger of being overheard. But the one I recognized spoke with confidence, familiarity, the kind of voice that belonged inside these walls, not outside them." "A name," Kaelen said. "Even if you're not certain, even a guess." Elna hesitated, old fear flickering behind her eyes. "Garrick," she said finally. "He served as an advisor to the old queen, ambitious, clever, always positioned exactly where influence gathered." Kaelen felt something cold settle in his chest. Garrick had died years ago, an old man passing quietly in his sleep long after the fire, mourned as a loyal servant of the crown. If Garrick had been involved, whatever conspiracy he'd been part of hadn't necessarily died with him. "The fire started in the nursery wing first," Elna continued. "I woke because the smoke reached me before the flames did. I grabbed you without thinking, without even pausing to consider whether I could carry you fast enough, and I ran. The queen was already trying to reach us from the other end of the hall, and I remember screaming for her to follow, but the flames had already closed that path. I never saw her again after that moment." Wren's hand tightened around Elna's, her own eyes wet, though she said nothing, letting the older woman continue. "I didn't know who was safe to trust," Elna said. "If Garrick had set that fire, or ordered it set, then anyone close enough to the family might have been involved, might have been paid to look away, might have been waiting to finish what the flames didn't. So I ran further than I needed to, past the border, past the territory lines, and somewhere in that flight, exhausted and terrified and trying to shift into a form that could carry you faster and hide us both more easily, something in me broke. I couldn't shift back. Not that night, not the next, not ever again, until tonight." 15 years, Kaelen said quietly, the scale of the sacrifice settling into him fully now. 15 years, trapped in that shape, unable to explain yourself to anyone, unable to warn anyone, unable to do anything except stay close enough to protect her. "It was the only thing I could still do," Elna said simply, "so I did it, every single day." The healer insisted, gently but firmly, that Elna needed to sleep, that the conversation could continue once her body had recovered further from the strain of the shift. Elna did not argue this time, her strength finally spent, and within minutes She had drifted into a deep, exhausted sleep, her hand still loosely tangled in Wren's fingers, even as consciousness left her. Kaelen rose and stepped toward the window, staring out at the dark courtyard below, turning the name Garrick over in his mind like a stone he couldn't quite identify the weight of. "He's been dead for years," Wren said quietly, coming to stand beside him, her eyes red but her voice steady. "Doesn't that mean whatever he started, it's already over?" "Men like Garrick rarely work alone," Kaelen said. "And ambition doesn't die just because the man carrying it does. If he had allies then, some of them may still be here now, still trusted, still comfortable, still believing the truth burned along with that nursery 15 years ago. And if they learn it didn't, then we have very little time before they decide to finish what they started," Kaelen said. "Which means we can't simply announce who you are to the entire pack tomorrow morning. We need to know exactly who else was involved before we hand them a reason to act." Wren wrapped her arms around herself, the same protective gesture Kaelen had first noticed the morning he'd found her in the stables, though it looked different now, weighted with new understanding instead of simple exhaustion. "I spent my whole life believing I had no history worth knowing," she said, "and now I find out I have one large enough to get people killed." "You didn't create this danger," Kaelen said. "It existed the moment that fire was set. You've simply been the one it's been waiting to find again." Below them, the courtyard sat empty and silent, under a sky heavy with unshed snow, and somewhere within the castle's ancient walls, records that had gone untouched for 15 years were about to become the most dangerous documents in the entire kingdom, waiting only for the right hands to search them with the right questions in mind. Kaelen spent the next 3 days moving carefully, giving nothing away to the court while quietly gathering everything he could about Garrick's old allies. He worked with only Doran and Alden at his side, trusting no one else, with a truth that could still get Wren killed if it reached the wrong ears too soon. The records were incomplete, deliberately so in places, pages missing from ledgers that should have held complete accounts of the fire's aftermath. But patterns emerged anyway, the way patterns always did when enough careful eyes searched long enough. 3 names surfaced repeatedly beside Garrick's in old correspondence. Men who had served the pack in minor advisory roles during the years surrounding the fire. 2 of those men had died long ago, their names fading quietly into the pack's forgotten history. The third had not. Corwin. Kaelen recognized the name instantly, and the recognition landed like a blow to the chest. Corwin now served as one of the pack's most trusted council members, a soft-spoken man known for his careful advice and his loyalty to the crown across 2 full decades of service. He sat in meetings beside Kaelen every single week. He had, in fact, been among the loudest voices urging caution about the vagrant woman, now housed in the family wing, insisting she be questioned formally, insisting her presence posed an unknown risk to pack security. "He's been telling us to be suspicious of her from the very first day," Doran said, once Kaelen laid the pieces out before him privately. "If he knew who she truly was, then every warning he's given has been an attempt to isolate her long enough to finish what Garrick started 15 years ago," Kaelen finished grimly. "We can't move against a council member without proof," Alden warned. "Not without risking exactly the kind of chaos that would make it easier for him to act, not harder." "Then we get proof," Kaelen said, quietly, "before he realizes we're looking." Meanwhile, in the East Wing, Elna's strength slowly returned, though her body remained fragile from 15 years spent trapped in a form never meant to hold that long. Wren rarely left her side, torn between joy at finally having answers and fear over the danger those answers had unearthed. "You should tell him everything you remember about Corwin," Wren said one evening, watching Elna carefully sip warm broth the healer had prepared. "Every detail, even the smallest ones." "I've told Kaelen everything I know," Elna said, "but memory from 15 years ago isn't always reliable, especially memory formed in the middle of a fire while running for both our lives. It's more than we had a week ago. It's more than I ever thought we'd have again," Elna agreed, reaching for Wren's hand with fingers still thin and weak, but steadier than they had been. I used to lie awake in that shape, back when wolves could still lie awake with thoughts as clear as any humans, and wonder if I would die before ever getting the chance to tell you who you truly were. You didn't die, Wren said softly. You held on. For 15 years, you held on. Because you were worth holding on for, Elna said simply. The moment was interrupted by a soft knock, and Kaelen entered, looking more tired than Wren had yet seen him, the weight of the last 3 days visible in the tightness around his eyes. We found something, he said, a name connected to Garrick, someone still very much alive, someone very close to this family. Wren's stomach dropped. How close? Close enough that he's sat across from me at council meetings for years, Kaelen said. Close enough that he's been the loudest voice arguing you should be treated as a threat rather than a guest. He knows who I am, Wren said, understanding settling over her like ice water. That's why he wants me questioned, removed. Anything that puts distance between me and this family before anyone else realizes the truth. That's my fear as well, Kaelen said. Then confront him, Wren said. Now before he has any more time to plan whatever he's already planning. It isn't that simple, Kaelen said. He's a council member with 2 decades of loyal service behind him. If I move against him without proof, strong enough to convince the elders, I risk looking like a king protecting a stranger over trusted advisors. It could tear this pack apart before we've even confirmed the danger is real. So we wait, Wren said, frustration sharpening her voice, while he decides how to finish what he started. We don't wait, Kaelen said. We move carefully, and we move fast, but we move in a way that doesn't hand him a reason to act before we're ready. That night, unable to settle, Wren walked the quiet halls near the east wing alone, needing air, needing space to think through a truth still too large to fully hold. She did not notice, at first, the figure standing near the far end of the corridor, watching her with quiet, careful attention. You're out late, Corwin said, his voice mild, almost pleasant, though something in his eyes carried a stillness that made her skin prickle. Couldn't sleep, Wren said, keeping her tone light, despite the sudden thundering of her own heartbeat. Understandable, given the circumstances, Corwin said. New surroundings, new questions about your past, from what I understand, must be overwhelming. It has been, she said carefully, unsure how much he already knew, unwilling to give away more than necessary. I've served this family for 20 years, Corwin said, stepping slightly closer, his voice never rising above its careful, measured pitch. I remember the fire that took the old queen. I remember how much grief this pack carried afterward, grief that took years to properly heal. That must have been difficult, Wren said, forcing herself to hold his gaze rather than retreat. It was, Corwin agreed, which is why I find myself so very curious about a woman who arrives out of nowhere, accompanied by a wolf, carrying scent markings that I'm told shouldn't exist anymore. Curious timing, don't you think? 15 years of peace, and suddenly the past comes walking back through the stable doors. Wren's blood ran cold. He knew, not suspected, knew. I should get back, she said, taking a careful step backward. Of course, Corwin said, stepping aside to let her pass, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. Sleep well, Wren. I imagine the coming days will require all the strength you can gather. She walked away without running, forcing her steps to remain even until she rounded the corner, and only then did she let herself move quickly, her heart pounding, straight back toward the east wing where Kaelen was waiting with news of his own. He knows, she said the moment she found him. Corwin. He as good as told me himself in the corridor just now. Kaelen's expression hardened instantly. What exactly did he say? Wren recounted the conversation as precisely as she could, watching Kaelen's jaw tighten with every careful, veiled sentence Corwin had used. That wasn't an accident, Kaelen said when she finished. That was a warning. He wanted you to know that he knows, wanted you frightened enough to make a mistake, to run, to give him a reason to act against you that looks justified rather than desperate. Then what do? We move tonight, Kaelen said, before he decides waiting no longer serves him. He gathered Doran and Alden within the hour, laying out everything they had found, everything Wren had just described, and the small council of trusted men agreed there was no longer room for careful patience. Whatever proof they lacked, Corwin's own behavior had just handed them enough urgency to act. They moved through the castle's lower halls near midnight, toward the private study Corwin kept near the council chambers, and found the room already empty, a single lantern still burning low on the desk, papers scattered as though someone had left in a hurry only minutes before. "He's gone," Doran said grimly, scanning the room. "Gone where?" Alden asked. Kaelen's eyes fell on a half-burned letter near the lantern's edge. The wax seal cracked, the handwriting hurried and uneven in a way that suggested panic rather than careful planning. He picked it up carefully, reading the surviving fragments, and felt something cold and certain settle over him. "He's not running," Kaelen said. "He's finishing it. Tonight." "Finishing what?" Doran asked. Kaelen was already moving toward the door, his voice tight with an urgency that left no room for further questions. "He's going after Elna," he said, "the only living witness who can name him without doubt. If she dies before she can speak in front of the elders, whatever proof we've gathered means nothing." Wren did not wait to be told to stay behind. She was already moving before Kaelen finished speaking, cutting through a side corridor she had memorized in only a handful of days, some instinct pulling her feet in the right direction faster than conscious thought could explain. "Wren, wait," Kaelen called, but she was already gone, weaving through servant passages that ran parallel to the main halls, desperate to reach the east wing before anyone else could. She burst through the door to find the healer standing frozen near the window, hands raised, and Corwin standing over Elna's sleeping form with a blade drawn, his careful, mild expression from the corridor now stripped away entirely, replaced by something far colder. "Don't," Wren said, her voice sharper and steadier than she felt. "You shouldn't have come back," Corwin said, not looking away from Elna. "This would have been simpler if you'd run when you had the chance." "You set the fire," Wren said, forcing her voice to stay level despite the terror clawing up her throat. 15 years ago, you killed the queen. You tried to kill me. I did what needed doing," Corwin said. "Your mother's bloodline was never as secure as this pack believed. There were others with stronger claims, better suited to lead, and I was simply the one willing to correct an imbalance no one else had the courage to address." "So you burned a nursery," Wren said, disgust cutting through her fear, "with an infant inside. An infant who, by all accounts, should have died that night," Corwin said. "I've spent 15 years believing that mistake had at least been corrected, even if imperfectly. Imagine my surprise to learn it had simply been sleeping in a stable this entire time." He raised the blade slightly, his attention finally shifting fully toward Wren rather than the unconscious woman behind him. "Kill me then," Wren said, refusing to step back, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her retreat. "But you'll have to explain to an entire pack why their trusted council member murdered a woman in front of witnesses, in the middle of the family wing, days after that same woman was confirmed to be their long-lost heir." "There won't be witnesses left to explain anything," Corwin said, and took a single step forward. That step was as far as he got. Kaelen hit him from the side with the full force of a man who had spent his entire life training for exactly this kind of moment, driving him hard into the wall before the blade could close any distance toward Wren at all. Doran and Alden arrived seconds later, and within moments Corwin was pinned, disarmed, his careful mask completely gone now, replaced by naked fury at having been stopped so close to finishing what he'd started 15 years earlier. "You should have died in that fire," he spat at Wren, straining uselessly against Doran's grip. "All of this would have been so much simpler." "Simpler for you," Kaelen said coldly, standing over him now. "Not for the pack you've spent 20 years pretending to serve faithfully." Elna stirred at the commotion, waking slowly, her eyes widening as she took in the scene, Corwin restrained on the floor, Wren shaking but unharmed, Kaelen standing between them with his chest still heaving from the effort of the fight. "It's him," Elna said quietly, recognition and old grief mixing together in her voice. "I recognized his voice that night, outside the nursery. I just never had proof strong enough to say it aloud." "You have more than enough proof now," Kaelen said. He confirmed everything himself, in front of witnesses, with his own blade drawn against an unarmed woman. Corwin said nothing further as guards arrived to remove him, his silence more damning than any denial could have been, and as the door finally closed behind him, the room seemed to exhale all at once, 15 years of held tension finally beginning, slowly, painfully, to release. Wren sank to the floor beside Elna, both women trembling now that the immediate danger had passed, and Kaelen knelt beside them, his hand resting briefly, steadying, against Wren's shoulder. "It's over," he said quietly. "Not yet," Wren said, her voice still shaking. "Now we have to tell the entire pack the truth. All of it." "Yes," Kaelen agreed. "But this time, you won't be telling it alone." The great hall had not been filled to capacity in years, not since the last formal gathering of every senior pack member, every elder, every family line with a voice in the territory's future. Word had spread overnight, careful and controlled, that the king had urgent news concerning the fire 15 years past, and curiosity alone had been enough to fill every seat before the sun had fully cleared the hills. Wren stood at the edge of the hall, Elna beside her, still weak but standing on her own strength, refusing every offer to remain resting elsewhere. The pregnant wolf was gone now, replaced permanently by the woman who had worn that shape for 15 years, though the physical toll of that transformation still showed clearly in the careful, measured way she moved. "You don't have to do this today," Kaelen said quietly, standing close beside them both. "We can wait until Elna has recovered further." "No," Elna said firmly. "I have waited 15 years to say this. I will not wait one more day longer than necessary." The elders quieted as Kaelen took his place before them, and the room fell into the particular, heavy silence that gathered whenever a king prepared to speak of something that would change more than it explained. 15 years ago, Kaelen began, this pack lost its queen to a fire we were told was accidental. We were told her infant daughter died alongside her, and we grieved that loss as a pack, together, believing the worst had already happened and there was nothing left to do but endure it. Murmurs rippled through the hall, uncertain, wary of where this was heading. "That fire was not an accident," Kaelen continued. "It was set deliberately, by a man this pack trusted for 2 decades afterward, sitting among our own council, advising on matters of succession and security, while carrying the truth of what he had done, buried beneath a mask of loyalty." The murmurs sharpened into open unrest. An elder near the front rose partway from his seat. "Corwin," he said, disbelief and dawning horror mixing in his voice. "You cannot mean—" "I mean exactly that," Kaelen said. "Corwin set the fire that killed our queen. And in setting it, he believed he had also killed her infant daughter, the rightful heir to this pack's throne." He gestured toward Wren, and every eye in the hall turned toward her at once, the weight of 100 stares landing heavier than any blade could have. "He was wrong," Kaelen said. "The infant did not die that night. She was carried out of that fire by her nursemaid, a woman who has spent every single day since protecting her in secret, at a cost none of us fully understood until 3 days ago." He turned toward Elna, giving her the space to speak for herself, rather than allowing the story to be told entirely through his own voice. "My name is Elna," she said, her voice carrying further than her frail frame suggested it could. "I served as nursemaid to the old queen's daughter. The night of the fire, I overheard enough to know the danger was not finished, that whoever set those flames might still be close enough to finish what they started if the child's survival ever became known. So I ran, and kept running, and in my desperation to protect her, I lost the ability to shift back into this form at all. I have spent 15 years as a wolf, unable to speak, unable to warn anyone, able only to stay close enough to guard the only promise I had left to keep. A stunned silence held the hall for a long moment before the same elder, who had spoken before, rose fully to his feet. "You are asking us to believe the wolf found in the stables 3 days ago is the same nursemaid who vanished the night of the fire," he said, skepticism warring visibly with something that looked almost like hope, "and that the woman beside her is the Queen's lost daughter." "I understand how difficult that is to accept," Kaelen said, "which is why I did not bring this truth before you until I had confirmed it beyond doubt. Scent tracking confirmed royal den markings on the wolf that could only have been laid inside these very walls before the fire. And Corwin himself confirmed the rest with his own words, in front of witnesses, when he attempted to finish what he had started 15 years ago, rather than risk this truth reaching this hall." "Where is Corwin now?" another elder asked. "Under guard," Doran said, stepping forward, "awaiting judgment for treason, for the murder of our queen, and for the attempted murder of the heir he believed he had already killed once." The hall erupted into overlapping voices, disbelief and anger, and grief tangled together, 15 years of accepted history collapsing all at once into something far darker and far more complicated than anyone had prepared themselves to hear. Wren stood through all of it, steady despite the storm of attention, and when the noise finally began to settle, she stepped forward to speak for herself, her voice quiet at first, but growing steadier with each sentence. "I did not grow up knowing any of this," she said. "I was raised believing I was simply an orphan, moving from place to place, never quite understanding why certain memories never made sense with the life I was told I had lived. I did not ask for this history. I did not ask for a crown, or a bloodline, or a claim to anything at all. But I will not run from the truth either, not after everything Elna sacrificed to keep it alive long enough for me to finally hear it." She looked toward Kaelen, and something steady passed between them, unspoken but understood by everyone watching closely enough to notice. "I don't know what my place in this pack should be," she continued. "I've spent my whole life as no one in particular, and now I'm being asked to become someone this entire pack thought had died 15 years ago. I only know that I would rather stand here, in front of all of you, with the truth fully spoken, than continue living as a lie simply because the lie was easier for everyone to carry." The elders conferred quietly among themselves for a long while, the weight of the revelation settling slowly into something the pack would need considerable time to fully absorb. But by the time the council finally rose to address the hall again, their decision, though cautious, was unanimous in its direction. Wren's claim would be formally recognized, pending the traditional trials any heir was required to complete, trials she would now undergo not as a stranger seeking favor, but as blood already confirmed through scent, through record, and through the sworn testimony of the very man who had tried to erase her existence twice. Corwin's trial followed within the week, swift and thorough, his own confession from that night in the East Wing, corroborated by physical evidence uncovered once investigators knew precisely what to search for. He was stripped of his position, his title, and every privilege he had exploited for 2 decades to hide in plain sight, and the pack's judgment for his crimes was carried out according to the old laws, laws that had not been invoked in generations, because no betrayal in living memory had ever run this deep. In the weeks that followed, Elna's strength slowly returned under careful care, the 15 years of strain finally beginning to lift from a body that had spent so long holding itself together through will alone. She remained close to Wren always, refusing every gentle suggestion that she rest apart, insisting instead on witnessing every step of the new life unfolding in front of them both. "You don't have to keep guarding me every moment," Wren told her one quiet evening, the two of them sitting together near the same fire where the wolf had once slept restlessly beside her. "Old habits," Elna said, smiling for what felt like the first time in longer than either of them could properly measure. 15 years is a long time to learn a different way of loving someone. "You already loved me the right way," Wren said, taking her hand. "You just had to do it without a voice, for far too long." Kaelen found them there often in those weeks, drawn back again and again to the quiet warmth of that particular corner of the east wing, and slowly, carefully, something began growing between himself and Wren that neither of them rushed to name too quickly, given everything else the last month had already demanded from both of them. "You could have turned me away that first morning," Wren said to him once, watching the fire rather than his face, though her hand had found its way naturally into his, without either of them quite deciding to allow it. "A stranger asleep in your stables, a wolf growling at you the moment you stepped through the door. Most kings would have called the guards and been done with it." "Most kings probably would have," Kaelen agreed, "but I've learned to trust the moments that don't make sense right away. That wolf wasn't growling like an animal defending territory. She was growling like someone who had already decided you were worth every risk it took to protect you." "She was right," Wren said softly. "She usually is," Kaelen said, glancing toward Elna, who pretended not to have heard, though the small smile on her face suggested otherwise. Months later, when Elna's own health had finally stabilized enough for the healers to stop their daily visits, and when Wren had completed enough of the traditional trials to be formally welcomed as the pack's confirmed heir, the entire territory gathered once more in the Great Hall, this time for a celebration rather than a confession. Kaelen stood before the assembled pack, Wren beside him, Elna seated with quiet dignity among the honored elders now, her place restored fully after 15 years spent unable to claim any place at all. "15 years ago," Kaelen said, addressing the hall, "this pack believed it had lost everything worth protecting in a single terrible night. We built our grief around an ending that was never actually true, and in doing so, nearly lost the chance to ever learn how wrong we were." He turned to Wren, and the hall fell silent, waiting. "Today, we don't gather to mourn what that fire took from us," he continued. "We gather to honor what survived it. A nursemaid who sacrificed 15 years of her own life to keep a promise alive, an heir who grew up not knowing her own name, yet never once stopped fighting for the truth once she finally found it, and a pack that is stronger today for finally facing a darkness it spent 15 years too afraid to look at directly." The hall rose together, a wave of applause and howls and old wordless sounds of pack unity rolling through the great space, and somewhere in the middle of it, Wren found Elna's eyes across the room, holding them for a long, steady moment. 15 years of silence, finally, completely broken. And standing there, surrounded by a pack finally whole again, Wren understood at last that the woman who had guarded her through every one of those silent years had never simply been a wolf sleeping beside her in a stall. She had been the truest kind of family there was, the kind that stays, no matter the shape it has to wear to do it.